The laughter started in a church parking lot on a Sunday morning in April of 1981. That's where it always starts, isn't it? In a place where people gather to worship God and judge their neighbors in equal measure. Lorraine Brennan was 47 years old that spring. Everyone called her Laura. She had the kind of face that the Iowa sun had weathered into something honest. Lines around her eyes from squinting at distant horizons. Hands that could rebuild an engine or bake a pie, depending on what the day required. She wore a simple cotton dress, the kind you could buy at JCPenney for $12. Clean but faded from 100 washings. Her truck was a 1967 Ford F-150. Powder blue, though most of the paint had given way to primer gray and rust. 14 years old that April, the passenger door didn't open from the outside anymore. The radio worked about half the time, but the engine ran smooth and strong because Laura maintained it herself, changing the oil every 3,000 miles without fail, keeping the fluids topped off, replacing parts before they failed. She parked that truck in the gravel lot of Grace Lutheran Church, same spot she'd been parking it for 6 years, and climbed out into the bright spring sunlight. The service had just ended. People were streaming out of the white clapboard building, shaking hands with Pastor Hendricks, making plans for lunch, commenting on the weather. Laura was reaching back into the truck for her Bible when she heard the laugh. It wasn't a quiet laugh. It was the kind of laugh designed to be heard, designed to draw attention. Vivian Hartwell had a gift for that kind of thing. Vivian was 45, 2 years younger than Laura, but looked younger than that, the way women with money and time and stylists often do. She'd just stepped out of a 1981 Mercedes 450 SL, silver metallic. The paint gleamed like liquid mercury in the sunlight. The leather interior was the color of cream. It still had that new car smell, though Vivian had owned it for 3 months now. She stood there in the parking lot in her outfit that had come from a boutique in Cedar Rapids, probably cost more than Laura spent on clothes in a year, and she laughed, loud enough that conversation stopped. Heads turned. "Laura, honey," Vivian called out, her voice carrying across the parking lot like a bell. "That truck is older than disco. How do you even show your face?" 10 women stood within earshot, maybe 12 church ladies who'd known each other for years, who sat in the same pews every Sunday, who brought the same casseroles to the same potlucks. They all turned to look. At Vivian, at her Mercedes, at Laura, at the rusted Ford with the broken door handle. Laura felt the heat rise in her face. Not from shame, from anger she couldn't show. Not here. Not in the church parking lot with Pastor Hendricks 20 feet away and everyone watching. "It runs fine," Laura said, her voice level and calm. "Paid it off in 19 sub, no payment, no stress." Vivian's smile didn't waver. If anything, it got wider, sharper. "That's so depression era," she said, drawing out the words. "I mean, I get it. Some people are more comfortable living in the past." She turned to the other women, including them in the joke. "Warren says Floyd came by to buy equipment yesterday. In that dinosaur." The lie sat there in the spring air like smoke. Floyd hadn't gone to the dealership. Laura had. "Floyd didn't go," Laura said quietly. "I did. I made the purchase. My decision." The gasps were small but audible. In Bremer County, Iowa, in 1981, farm wives didn't usually handle equipment purchases. They handled the house, the garden, the children, the books sometimes. But walking into a John Deere dealership to buy tractors, that was men's work. Vivian's smile froze for just a moment, just long enough for Laura to see the surprise, the recalculation. "Well, aren't you modern?" Vivian said, and the way she said it made modern sound like a disease. The church ladies exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked intrigued. A few looked like they agreed with Vivian that a woman making equipment decisions was somehow unseemly, improper, a violation of the natural order. Laura stood there holding her Bible, feeling the weight of their judgment, and made a choice. The choice she'd been making for 26 years of marriage, since she was 21 years old and newlywed to Floyd Brennan. She chose silence. She nodded once politely, turned back to her truck, retrieved her Bible, walked toward the church entrance where Floyd was waiting, talking to another farmer about corn prices. Behind her, she heard Vivian's voice, lower now, but still audible. "Can you imagine letting your wife buy farm equipment? Warren would never." The laughter that followed was quieter, more careful. But it was there. Laura kept walking. The thing about that moment in the parking lot was this: it wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. It was just the clearest, the most public, the one that drew the sharpest line between Laura Brennan and Vivian Hartwell, between two ways of living, two philosophies about money and debt and what it meant to have enough. To understand why Laura drove a 14-year-old truck with a broken door handle, you have to go back one day, to Saturday morning, to the moment that set everything in motion. The Hartwell John Deere dealership sat on Highway 63 just outside Waterloo. It was a sprawling complex of buildings, the main showroom with floor-to-ceiling windows, the parts department, the service bays, the lot, where rows of gleaming green and yellow tractors sat like soldiers awaiting deployment. Warren Hartwell owned it, had owned it since 1975 when he'd bought it from the original owner, a man named Morrison who'd built the business in the 1950s. Warren had expanded aggressively, added a second location in Cedar Falls in 1980, renovated both showrooms, tripled his inventory. The future, Warren liked to say, was in leverage, in growth, in modernization. Laura Brennan pulled her powder blue Ford into that parking lot on Saturday morning, April 18, 1981, at 9:30 in the morning. She'd left Floyd at home planting corn in the South 40. She'd packed a thermos of coffee and driven the 23 miles from their farm to Waterloo alone. She knew what she wanted. She'd known for 2 weeks ever since she'd seen the salvage lot behind the service bays. Two old Farmall M tractors sitting there among the rusted plows and broken hay balers. A 1948 and a 1952. Both red, both showing their age, both forgotten. The showroom was cool and bright when Laura walked in. Air conditioning hummed. Fluorescent lights gleamed off the polished concrete floor. Three brand new John Deere 4440 tractors dominated the space, massive and green and perfect. Each one wore a price tag, $32,000. Warren Hartwell looked up from his desk when Laura entered. He was a big man, over 6 feet, probably 240. He wore a suit even on Saturdays. Navy blue, tailored, expensive. His hair was styled with something that made it gleam under the lights. He stood when he saw her, smiled his salesman smile. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, coming around the desk with his hand extended. "Is Floyd parking the truck?" "Floyd's planting," Laura said, shaking his hand once firmly, then releasing it. "I'm here to buy equipment." Warren's smile didn't falter, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of surprise quickly concealed. "Well, wonderful," he said, gesturing toward the showroom floor. "Let me show you what we have. These 4340s are the finest tractors John Deere has ever built. 130 horsepower power shift transmission bob with air conditioning and heat. Everything a modern farming operation needs." "I saw two Farmall M's in your salvage lot," Laura said. "Behind the service bays, a 1948 and a 1952. I'd like to buy both of them." Warren stared at her, blinked, then laughed. It wasn't a polite laugh. It was the kind of laugh that escaped before you could stop it, the kind that revealed what you really thought. "Ma'am," he said, recovering quickly, "those tractors are junk. They're in the salvage lot because nobody wants them. I'm probably going to sell them for scrap metal." He gestured again to the 4440s. "What you want is sitting right here. Modern equipment, reliable, efficient." "How much for the two Farmalls?" Laura asked. Warren sighed, looked at this woman in her simple dress and her practical shoes, and saw someone who didn't understand, someone stuck in the past, someone who needed to be educated. "Mrs. Brennan, let me be straight with you. Those tractors are 33 and 29 years old, respectively. The 48 has a seized engine. The 52 runs but needs work. They're outdated technology. Parts are getting scarce. Any good mechanic will tell you that buying old equipment like that is throwing money away." He leaned forward slightly, adopting the tone of someone explaining something to a child. "Now these 4040s, they represent the future of farming. You can finance one for just $847 a month over 7 years. Very reasonable terms. Your operation would become more productive immediately. You'd see the return on investment in increased efficiency." "I can't afford $847 a month," Laura said simply. "I can afford $600 cash for two old Farmalls that I can fix myself." Warren's expression shifted. The friendliness drained away, replaced by something harder. "Mrs. Brennan, that's exactly the problem. You're thinking small. You are thinking like it's still 1950. This is 1981. Farming has changed. You have to invest in your operation to stay competitive. You have to leverage your equity. That's how modern farming works." "Or," Laura said quietly, "I can buy equipment I can afford, fix it myself, and not owe anybody anything." Warren shook his head slowly. When he spoke again, his voice carried an edge of condescension that made Laura's jaw tighten. "That's depression thinking. My grandfather thought like that. Farmed 160 acres with equipment from the 1930s his whole life. Died broke." He paused. "Is that what you want? To struggle along with the old junk while your neighbors move forward?" Laura was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Your grandfather still had his farm when he died, didn't he?" Warren blinked. Well, yes, but then he got exactly where he needed to go, Laura said. Now, will you take $600 for those two Farmalls or not? The silence that followed was cold. Warren's face had gone hard, the professional mask cracking to reveal genuine irritation underneath. This farm wife with her old truck and her backward thinking was wasting his time. He had real customers to deal with, farmers who understood that you had to spend money to make money. Fway, Warren said curtly. 600 cow, and when those hunks of junk break down in the middle of harvest, don't come back here expecting warranty service. Laura reached into her purse, pulled out her checkbook. The same checkbook she'd been balancing meticulously every month for 26 years, tracking every penny in and every penny out. She wrote the check in careful, precise handwriting. $600 and no cents. Signed it, tore it out, placed it on Warren's desk. Warren snatched it up, wrote out a bill of sale with barely concealed annoyance, shoved it across the desk. Laura folded it carefully, put it in her purse, turned to leave. That's when Vivian Hartwell walked in. Vivian was Warren's wife. She often stopped by the dealership on Saturdays, usually after shopping in Waterloo, usually carrying bags from stores that Laura had never set foot in. Today she wore designer jeans and a silk blouse and carried a shopping bag from a boutique called Marcella's. She saw Laura standing there, saw the checkbook still in Laura's hand, looked at Warren. "Did we make a sale?" Vivian asked brightly. "Mrs. Brennan just bought 2 pieces of salvage equipment," Warren said flatly, "from the scrap lot." Vivian's eyes widened. Then she laughed, the same laugh Laura would hear 24 hours later in the church parking lot. "Is she serious?" Vivian said, not to Laura but to Warren, as if Laura wasn't standing right there. "Floyd lets her make decisions about equipment." They both laughed then. Warren and Vivian standing in their showroom, surrounded by $32,000 tractors and polished floors, and air conditioning, laughing at the farm wife in the simple dress who just bought 2 old Farmalls for $600. Laura stood there for 3 seconds, long enough to memorize the moment, long enough to feel the full weight of their contempt. Then she walked out. The drive home was 23 miles. Laura didn't turn on the radio even though it was working that day. She just drove in silence, watching the Iowa landscape roll past, fields being planted, farmhouses with laundry on the line, other trucks, other farmers, everyone getting ready for another season. Her hands were steady on the wheel, they didn't shake, but inside something burned, not shame. She refused to feel shame for making a smart financial decision, but anger, at being laughed at being dismissed, at being treated like a fool. Floyd was washing up at the outdoor pump when she pulled into the yard. He was 47, same as Laura, lean and weathered with the permanent squint of a man who'd spent his life looking at the horizon. He dried his hands on his jeans and walked over as Laura climbed out of the truck. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Bought 2 Farmalls," Laura said. $600. Floyd nodded slowly. "They give you any trouble?" Laura was quiet for a moment. "Then Warren Hartwell thinks I'm a fool. His wife thinks it's funny that you let me make equipment decisions." Floyd's jaw tightened. "Want me to go down there?" "No." Laura shook her head. "I don't need you to fight my battles. I just need you to tell me the truth." "Did I make a mistake?" Floyd looked at his wife, this woman who'd worked beside him for 26 years. Who could drive a tractor as well as any man could rebuild an engine, could manage a budget down to the penny, could make a dollar stretch further than anyone he'd ever known. "You made the right call," he said simply. "We can afford 600 cash. We can't afford 800 a month for 7 years. Math is math." "They laughed at me," Laura said quietly. "Let them," Floyd replied. "We'll see who's laughing in 15 years. That Sunday after the incident in the church parking lot after the service where Laura sat in her usual pew and sang the hymns and listened to Pastor Hendricks preach about humility after the polite goodbyes and the drive home in the truck, with the broken door handle, Laura changed into her work clothes, jeans, flannel shirt, steel-toe boots that had belonged to Floyd's father and had been resold twice. She walked out to the shop. The shop was a metal building that Floyd and his father had built in 1963, 40 feet by 60 feet. Concrete floor, good lights, a full wall of tools organized with a precision that would make a surgeon weep, wrenches arranged by size, sockets in their trays, 3 different welding setups, a lathe, a drill press, a workbench that had been built by Floyd's grandfather in 1947 and was still dead level. The 2 Farmalls sat there hauled in yesterday afternoon with help from their neighbor Clifford Stevens and his tractor, the 1952 and the 1948. Both red, both old, both waiting. Laura walked to the 1952 first, climbed up into the seat. The metal was cold, even through her jeans. The steering wheel was worn smooth by decades of hands. She turned the key that Warren Hartwell had reluctantly provided. The engine coughed, sputtered, blew blue smoke, knocked like a diesel. But it ran. Laura sat there listening to it, learning its rhythms, hearing where the knock was coming from. Piston slap, worn bearings, valves that needed adjusting, an engine that needed work but had good bones. She shut it off, climbed down, walked to the workbench, pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pencil, started making a list. Rings, bearings, valve guides, gaskets, seals. Numbers appeared on the pad, part numbers, sizes, specifications she'd memorized over 26 years of keeping old equipment running. Floyd found her there an hour later, standing at the workbench with grease on her hands and that particular expression on her face that he'd learned to recognize. The expression that meant she'd made a decision and nothing was going to change her mind. Going to rebuild it, he asked. Both of them, Laura said. The 52 needs a full engine overhaul. The 48 is seized solid, pistons rusted to the cylinder walls. I'll have to tear it down completely. How long? 6 months, maybe less if I work at it steady. Floyd was quiet for a moment. Then Vivian Hartwell wouldn't know which end of a wrench to hold. Laura looked up from her list, met her husband's eyes. No, she said, she wouldn't. It became a rhythm, a routine. Every evening after the field work was done, after supper was finished, and the dishes were washed, Laura would walk out to the shop. Sometimes Floyd came with her. Often their son Clayton did. Clay was 14 that spring, old enough to hand his mother tools to learn how an engine worked, to understand that equipment didn't have to be new to be valuable. The work was methodical, careful. Laura tore the 1952's engine down piece by piece, laying parts out in order on the workbench. She measured everything, checked clearances, wrote down numbers, ordered parts from a supplier in Cedar Rapids who still stocked components for old Farmalls. The parts cost $287. Warren Hartwell could have sold her a rebuilt engine for $1,200. But Laura had time, had skill, had patience. She spent 40 hours spread over 3 months rebuilding that engine, honing cylinders, installing new rings, grinding valves, replacing bearings, working in the cool quiet of the shop while the Iowa spring turned to summer outside. The church ladies noticed. Of course they did. At the ladies' Bible study in May, Vivian Hartwell held court showing photographs from a trip she and Warren had taken to Europe. Paris, Rome, London, 10 days. Thousands of dollars charged to credit cards that were already carrying $15,000 in debt, though nobody knew that yet. Laura sat there looking at the photographs, saying nothing. You and Floyd should travel, one of the other women said to Laura. See the world while you're young enough to enjoy it. We're saving for retirement, Laura said simply. Vivian laughed. You can't take it with you. That's what credit is for. Live a little. Laura didn't argue. She'd learned long ago that you couldn't convince people who didn't want to be convinced. So she just smiled politely and changed the subject and went home that evening and balanced the checkbook like she did every month. The ledger was clear, simple, brutal in its honesty. Income from corn and soybeans, minus operating costs, minus property taxes, minus insurance, minus groceries and household expenses. What remained went into savings. The savings account at Community Bank had $187,000 in it that May. $187,000 accumulated over 26 years of farming, of buying equipment they could afford, of fixing things themselves, of living not beneath their means but within them, of saying no to debt, no to payments, no to keeping up with neighbors who measured success in the size of their tractors and the newness of their trucks. Laura ran her finger down the columns of numbers: income, expenses, savings, the mathematics of a life lived deliberately. Floyd came in from the evening chores and found her at the kitchen table with the ledger open. Everything okay? He asked. Vivian Hartwell went to Europe, Laura said. Good for her. She thinks I'm wasting my life, that I should live a little. Floyd poured himself coffee, sat down across from his wife, looked at the ledger. How much does Vivian have in savings? He asked quietly. Laura didn't know. Nobody did, not yet, but she suspected the answer was nothing, or worse than nothing. I sleep well at night, Laura said finally. That's living. Floyd nodded, sipped his coffee, said nothing more. By harvest time in the fall of 1981, Laura had both Farmalls running. The 1952 purred like a kitten with its rebuilt engine. The 1948, after months of patient work, fired up and ran smooth and strong. Total cost $600 for the purchase, $287 for the first engine, rebuilt $423 for the second, $1,310. Warren Hartwell's 4040 would have cost $847 a month for 84 months. Total cost $71,148. The mathematics were undeniable. But mathematics weren't what drove Vivian Hartwell's contempt, or the church lady's opinions, or the subtle judgments that Laura felt every time she parked her 14-year-old truck in town. What drove those things was fear. Fear that Laura Brennan might be right, that old might be better than new, that debt might be slavery, that the price of keeping up with the neighbors might be losing everything. Thanksgiving came. Laura and Floyd hosted like they did every year. Floyd's mother, Edith, came 72 years old and sharp as ever. A few neighbors, and Warren and Vivian Hartwell invited out of social obligation more than friendship. Vivian arrived in the Mercedes. Warren drove a new Cadillac. They both wore clothes that looked expensive because they were expensive. They brought wine in a bottle that probably cost $40. Laura served turkey she'd raised herself and vegetables from her garden and rolls she'd made that morning. The meal was simple, good, honest. Vivian looked around Laura's kitchen with barely concealed condescension, at the avocado green appliances from 1968, at the linoleum floor from 1972, at the pine cabinets that Floyd's father had built. "This is so authentic," Vivian said, and made authentic sound like another word for poor. Edith Brennan, Floyd's mother, looked up from her mashed potatoes. She was a small woman weathered by 72 Iowa winters, with hands that had worked every day since she was 6 years old. "This kitchen fed 3 generations without debt," Edith said mildly. "Still works just fine." Vivian's smile froze. She opened her mouth to respond. That's when the radio playing softly in the background caught everyone's attention. The news announcer's voice cut through the dinner conversation. The Federal Reserve announced today that the prime lending rate has reached 21.5%, the highest in American history. Chairman Volcker stated that aggressive interest rate increases are necessary to combat inflation. Warren Hartwell's face went pale. Not obviously, not dramatically, but Laura saw it, saw the blood drain from his cheeks, saw his hand tighten on his fork, saw his eyes go distant for just a moment. She filed it away, said nothing, but she knew. Warren Hartwell was drowning in debt, had borrowed heavily to expand his dealerships, and the water had just gotten a lot deeper. The meal continued, conversation resumed. Vivian recovered her composure and talked about their Christmas plans, a ski trip to Colorado, all of it financed on credit cards that were already maxed. Laura served pie, cleared dishes, smiled and nodded and said very little. That night, after the guests had left, after the dishes were washed and put away, Floyd found Laura sitting on the porch in the cold November darkness. "You saw it too," he said, not a question. "Warren's in trouble," Laura said. "How much trouble?" "Bad enough that 21.5% made him go white." They sat in silence for a while. The Iowa night was clear and cold. Stars filled the sky. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. "It's starting," Floyd said quietly. Laura nodded. She'd been feeling it for months. In the way farmers talked at the grain elevator, in the nervous edge to conversations about land prices and grain prices and interest rates. In the way banks had started asking harder questions. The farm crisis. It was coming, and when it arrived, it would separate the careful from the careless, the prepared from the over-leveraged, those who owned what they had from those who owed more than they could pay. Laura Brennan sat on her porch in the cold November darkness and felt something settle in her chest. Not fear, not exactly, more like a grim certainty. The laughter in the church parking lot, the mockery at the dealership, the condescension at Bible study. All of it was about to be tested. And Laura knew with the same certainty, she knew that spring followed winter, that when the testing came, she and Floyd would still be standing. Because they owed nothing. And debt in the end was the only thing that could destroy you. Winter came to Iowa the way it always did, slowly at first, then all at once. By December of 1981, the fields were frozen hard as iron, and the work shifted from the land to the shop. Laura spent her evenings there in the metal building with the good lights and the tools arranged just so. The 1948 Farmall sat in the center bay like a patient on an operating table. Engine seized solid, pistons rusted to the cylinder walls. 40 hours of work ahead of her, maybe more. She started on a Tuesday evening. Clay held the drop light while she disconnected the fuel lines, the electrical system, the manifolds. 14 years old and learning. Watching his mother work with the same focused intensity she brought to everything. "Why doesn't Dad do this?" Clay asked as Laura unbolted the cylinder head. "Your father's good with field work," Laura said, not looking up. "I'm better with engines. Kids at school say it's weird that moms don't fix tractors." Laura set down her wrench, looked at her son in the yellow light of the shop. Your grandmother Edith taught me to wrench in 1955, she said. I was 21, just married to your father. She took me out to this very shop and said, farm wives can't wait around for men to fix things. You need to learn. Laura picked up the wrench again. So I learned, and now I'm teaching you. That's how it works. Clay was quiet for a moment. Then Tommy Hartwell says his mom drove to Chicago to go shopping. Says they're staying at a hotel. Laura didn't respond immediately. She was working a stoic bolt, applying steady pressure, feeling for the moment when the rust would give way. Tommy Hartwell's mom can do what she wants with her money, Laura said finally. We do what we want with ours. The bolt broke free. Laura moved to the next one. The work became a meditation. Each evening after supper, Laura in the shop taking the engine apart piece by piece. Pistons that had to be driven out with a hammer and drift. Cylinder walls that needed honing. Valves that needed grinding. Bearings that needed replacing. She kept a notebook. Measurements, part numbers. Costs tallied in neat columns. The parts arrived from Cedar Rapids in brown cardboard boxes. Rings, gaskets, bearings, seals. $423 total. Laura wrote the check without hesitation. This was investment, not expense. Money spent to make something useful, to create value, to build equity in equipment she would own free and clear. January turned to February. The engine slowly came back together. Laura's hands carried the permanent smell of solvent and grease. Her fingernails bore traces of oil that wouldn't wash out completely. She didn't care. In town, at the grain elevator at the bank, other farmers' wives noticed, commented. Some with admiration, most with something else. Confusion, maybe. A vague unease that a woman would choose to spend her evenings rebuilding tractor engines instead of watching television or doing needlework or whatever it was farm wives were supposed to do. Vivian Hartwell noticed too. The ladies' Bible study met every other Thursday at Grace Lutheran. 15 women gathered in the church basement to discuss scripture and drink coffee, and inevitably to discuss their lives. In February of 1982, Vivian arrived wearing a new coat. Wool, camel-colored, the kind of coat you saw in magazines. She hung it carefully on the coat rack and made sure everyone saw the label. Warren gave it to me for Valentine's Day, she said, running her hand over the fabric. From Marshall Fields in Chicago. We made a weekend of it. Stayed at the Palmer House. The other women made appreciative sounds, asked questions about Chicago, about the hotel, about the shopping. Laura sat quietly in her chair wearing a cardigan she'd owned for 8 years. She said nothing. Laura, you and Floyd should take a trip, one of the other women said. Margaret Schultz, wife of a dairy farmer. Kind woman, meant well. When was the last time you two went somewhere? We went to Des Moines last fall, Laura said, to the state fair. Vivian laughed, not unkindly, or so it seemed on the surface, but there was an edge to it. I mean a real trip, Vivian said. Paris, London, somewhere exciting. You can't take it with you, you know. Live a little while you're young enough to enjoy it. Laura met Vivian's eyes, held them. We're saving for retirement, she said simply, so we can enjoy our 60s and 70s without worry. That's 30 years away, Vivian said. You'll waste your whole life saving for someday. Or, Laura said quietly, I'll reach someday with money in the bank instead of credit card bills. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. The other women looked down at their Bibles, their coffee cups, anywhere but at Laura or Vivian. Vivian's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in her eyes. Something defensive. Well, she said lightly, to each their own. The Bible study resumed, but the tension lingered. What Laura didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Vivian Hartwell's new coat and Chicago weekend had added $1,800 to credit cards that were already carrying $15,000 in debt. The Palmer House, Marshall Fields, dinner at restaurants where appetizers cost more than Laura spent on groceries in a week, all of it charged, all of it accumulating interest at rates that were climbing month by month. But the coat was beautiful. The weekend was memorable. And if Vivian felt a flutter of anxiety, when she thought about the credit card statements, she pushed it down. Told herself that Warren's dealership was doing well, that they could afford it, that you only lived once. The lie was easier than the truth. March brought the first real hint that something was wrong in the wider world. Not in Laura's world. Her world remained steady. The 1948 Farmalls engine was finally complete, installed, test-fired. It ran smooth and strong, better than it had in 30 years. But in town at the grain elevator where farmers gathered to sell their corn and soybeans, the conversations had changed. Laura heard it when she delivered a load of corn in mid-March. She was backing the truck up to the dump when she heard two farmers talking near the office. Tried to refinance with First National, one of them said. They won't touch me. Rate would be 18%. Jesus, the other one muttered. What were you paying before 8? The silence spoke volumes. Laura climbed out of the truck, pulled the handle to dump the corn. Listened to the golden kernels pour into the hopper, while her mind worked the mathematics. A $100,000 loan at 8% meant monthly payments around $1,400. Painful but manageable for a decent-sized farming operation. The same loan at 18% meant payments around $2,800. Double, for the same amount of money borrowed. She thought about Eugene and Doris Miller, thought about their new equipment, their new house, all of it financed, all of it with loans coming due needing refinancing. The flutter in her chest wasn't quite fear, more like recognition, like watching storm clouds gather on a distant horizon and knowing they were coming your way. Doris Miller was Laura's closest friend in Bremer County. They'd known each other since high school, had married in the same year, had raised children the same age. Their farms were 4 miles apart. They called each other every few weeks, met for coffee when they could. Doris was 43, cheerful by nature, optimistic, the kind of woman who saw the best in everyone and believed that everything would work out fine. Her husband, Gene, was the same way. Good farmer, hard worker, but a believer in the conventional wisdom. The agricultural extension agents who said to expand or die. The bankers who made borrowing easy. The dealers who sold equipment on generous terms. In 1981, Gene Miller had bought a new John Deere 4440 for $32,000, $847 a month for 7 years. In 1980, he'd bought a new combine for $72,000, $1,805 a month for 10 years. In 1980, they'd built a new house, a modest house by some standards, but new, modern, comfortable. Financed for $120,000 over 20 years. Total monthly debt service, $2,652. Gene and Doris Miller made about $6,000 a month in a good year, which left them $3,300 for everything else. Fuel, seed, fertilizer, groceries, utilities, insurance, property taxes, repairs, life. It was manageable. Tight, but manageable. Unless something changed. Something changed. The phone rang at the Brennan farmhouse on a Tuesday evening in late April. Laura answered it on the third ring, expecting it to be Floyd calling from town. It was Doris. She was crying, not the quiet crying of someone trying to hold it together, the gasping, hiccuping crying of someone who'd been pushed past the breaking point. Laura, Doris managed. Can you come over? Laura grabbed her truck keys, told Clay to tell his father where she'd gone, drove the 4 miles to the Miller farm in gathering darkness. She found Doris sitting at her kitchen table. The new kitchen with its modern appliances and oak cabinets and vinyl flooring. Paperwork spread across the table. Gene nowhere in sight. He's in the barn, Doris said when Laura asked. Can't face me right now. Laura sat down, put her hand on Doris's. Tell me, she said simply. The story came out in fragments. The loan on the tractor was coming due for refinancing. 5-year balloon payment. They'd borrowed $32,000 in 1981 at 8% paid interest, and some principal for a year still owed $28,000. The bank would refinance it, but not at 8%, 18%. The payment would go from $847 to $1,523, an increase of $676 a month, $8,112 a year. We can't afford it, Doris whispered. We're barely making it now. Gene tried 3 other banks. They all said the same thing, 18% or nothing. Laura looked at the papers spread across the table, did the math in her head. How much do you owe total? She asked quietly. $237,000, Doris said. The house, the equipment, the combine, all of it. Laura was silent. $237,000. More than the farm was worth now that land prices were starting to slip. More than Gene could pay off in a lifetime of farming. What did the bank say about the other loans? Laura asked. They all come due within the next 2 years, Doris said. All at the new rates. The mathematics were brutal, unavoidable. The Millers were drowning and the water was rising. Laura, Doris said, and her voice broke. You tried to tell me. Last year when Gene bought the tractor, you said we should be careful about debt. I should have listened. Laura squeezed her friend's hand. This isn't your fault, she said firmly. The banks pushed this. The dealers pushed this. The government told everyone to expand. You did what everyone said to do. But you didn't, Doris said. You and Floyd, you stayed small. You bought old equipment. Everyone laughed at you. I laughed at you. And now, she couldn't finish the sentence. Laura sat there in that modern kitchen, surrounded by debt, and felt a familiar anger rising. Not at Doris, at a system that encouraged farmers to borrow beyond their means. That made debt seem like progress and caution seem like cowardice. "Come to our place tomorrow," Laura said. "Bring your books, all of them. Let me look at everything. Maybe there's something we can figure out." Doris nodded, wiping her eyes. "Jean's too proud to ask for help." "Then don't tell him it's help," Laura said. "Tell him it's friends looking at options together." The next evening, Doris arrived with a cardboard box full of paperwork. Bank statements, loan documents, tax returns, the financial skeleton of the Miller farm laid bare. They spread it across Laura's kitchen table, the same pine table that had been in this kitchen since 1947. Laura put on her reading glasses, started going through the numbers with the same focused attention she brought to rebuilding engines. The picture that emerged was worse than she'd thought. The Millers didn't just owe $237,000. They were upside down. Their farm was worth less than what they owed on it. Land prices had started falling. Equipment was depreciating. If they tried to sell everything and walk away, they'd still owe the bank $100,000. They were trapped. Laura worked the numbers 3 different ways. Looked for angles, options, ways to reduce expenses or increase income or buy time. There weren't any. The mathematics were merciless. "What do I do?" Doris asked, her voice small. Laura took off her reading glasses, rubbed her eyes, felt the weight of knowing she couldn't fix this, couldn't save her friend from what was coming. "You survive," Laura said finally. "You cut expenses everywhere you can. You plant your crops and hope for good prices. You pray for a miracle, and you prepare for the worst." "Which is foreclosure," Laura said quietly. "Losing the farm." Doris closed her eyes, nodded. She'd known. Of course she'd known, but hearing it said aloud made it real. "Will you still be my friend?" Doris asked. "When everyone knows we failed." Laura stood, walked around the table, put her arms around Doris and held her while she cried. "You didn't fail," Laura said fiercely. "The system failed you, and yes, I'll always be your friend." That night, after Doris had gone home after the paperwork was cleared away, Floyd found Laura sitting on the porch in the cold spring darkness. "Millers are in trouble," he said. "Not a question. Bad trouble," Laura confirmed. "They can't refinance, can't sell, can't make the payments. They're going to lose everything." Floyd sat down beside his wife. They'd been married 27 years. He knew her silences, knew when she was working through something. "Are we going to be okay?" he asked. It was the same question Laura had asked him a year ago. Now she had the answer. She went inside, came back with the ledger, sat down and opened it to the current page. "We have $194,000 in savings," she said, running her finger down the column. "The farm is paid off. The equipment is paid off. The trucks are paid off. We owe exactly $0 to anyone." She looked at her husband. "We're going to be more than okay," she said. "We're going to be fine, because we don't owe anything. And debt is the only thing that can kill you in a crisis." Floyd nodded slowly. "How bad is it going to get?" "Bad," Laura said. "Really bad. This is just the start." She was right. Through the spring and summer of 1982, the crisis spread like a stain. Farms started going under, not the big operations, not yet, but the medium-sized ones. The ones that had expanded in the late 1970s, the ones carrying heavy debt loads. At church, families started disappearing. The Johnsons, the Petersons, the Schultz dairy farm. Gone, foreclosed, auctioned. Families that had farmed for 3 generations wiped out in 18 months. The grain elevator became a place of whispered conversations and haunted eyes. Farmers who'd always stood straight, always met your gaze, now looked at the ground. Carried the shame of loans they couldn't pay, land they couldn't keep. Laura and Floyd kept farming, kept their heads down, helped where they could, but didn't draw attention to the fact that they were surviving while others weren't. At Bible study, the conversation changed. No more talk of trips to Europe. No more showing off new coats or jewelry. The women who remained were quieter, worried. Some of their husbands were struggling. Some were drowning. Vivian Hartwell still came, but less often. And when she did, she looked different, tired. Older, the sparkle had gone out of her. In June, Laura saw her at Shopko. Not the boutique in Cedar Rapids. Shopko, the discount store where people went to save money. Vivian was in the clothing section looking at generic brands. She saw Laura. Their eyes met. Vivian looked away quickly, grabbed the clothes she'd been examining, and moved to another aisle. Laura stood there for a moment, understanding what she'd just witnessed. The Hartwells were in trouble too. She didn't follow Vivian, didn't confront her, just filed the information away and finished her shopping. That evening, she mentioned it to Floyd. Saw Vivian Hartwell at Shopko today, Laura said, buying clothes on clearance. Floyd looked up from his newspaper. Warren's dealership hurting, Anna. Must be. Nobody's buying new tractors when they can't pay for the ones they already have. They were quiet for a moment. Do you feel vindicated? Floyd asked. Laura thought about it. About the laughter in the church parking lot. About being called a fool for buying old equipment. About all the contempt and condescension she'd endured. No, she said finally. I just feel sad for all of them. Summer turned to fall. Harvest came. The Brennans brought in their corn and soybeans with the same old equipment they'd been running for years. The two Farmalls that Laura had rebuilt worked flawlessly. The other tractors, all old, all paid for, kept running. Their yields were good, not spectacular, but good. And because they had no debt service eating up their income, they could actually keep what they made. The savings account grew. 194,000 became 200,000, and then 207,000. Other farmers looked at Laura and Floyd differently now, not with contempt, with something closer to envy or regret. In October, Laura ran into Gene Miller at the grain elevator. He looked like he'd aged 10 years, lost weight, gray creeping into his hair. How's Doris? Laura asked. Hanging in, Gene said quietly. Bank's being patient, for now. And you? Gene looked at her. His eyes were hollow. We're going to lose it, Laura. Maybe not this year, but soon. Can't make the payments, can't refinance, can't sell. We're just waiting. Laura wanted to say something comforting. Wanted to tell him it would be okay, but she'd never been a liar. I'm sorry, she said simply. Gene nodded, started to walk away, then stopped. Turned back. You were right, he said. Back in '81 when Doris told you about the new tractor. You said to be careful. I should have listened. Gene? No, he interrupted. You were right. Everyone told us to expand, to leverage, to modernize. Everyone was wrong. You were the only one who knew. He walked away before Laura could respond. She stood there in the October sunshine feeling the weight of it, the vindication she didn't want. The knowledge that being right meant watching her friends lose everything. That night, Floyd found her in the shop. She was organizing tools, doing something with her hands because her mind wouldn't quiet down. Saw Gene today, she said. They're going to lose the farm. Floyd nodded. He'd heard the same rumors. We can't save them, he said gently. I know. We can't save anyone. I know that too. Floyd put his hand on his wife's shoulder. You made the right choices. That's all anyone can do. Laura set down the wrench she'd been cleaning, turned to face her husband. Everyone thinks we're lucky, she said. They don't understand that we chose this. Chose old equipment, chose no debt, chose to be laughed at for 20 years. Now they call it luck. Let them call it whatever they want, Floyd said. We know the truth. The foreclosures began in earnest in the spring of 1983. Laura heard about the Miller auction through Pastor Hendricks. Saturday, April 16th, 10 o'clock. Everything would be sold, land equipment, livestock, even the household goods. When the day came, Laura drove to the Miller farm alone. Floyd offered to come, but she said no. This felt like something she needed to witness by herself. The Miller farmyard was crowded by 9:30, maybe 100 people. Some were potential buyers, some were neighbors, some were just curious. The equipment was lined up in rows across the largest field. 2 John Deere 4040 tractors, barely 3 years old. The paint still gleamed. An A820 combine that had cost $72,000 new. A 12-row planter, a field cultivator, grain wagons, a sprayer, a truck, shop tools, everything. Laura parked on the road, walked toward the farmyard, found Doris standing alone by the barn away from the crowd. Doris looked like she'd aged a decade. Her face was gray. She'd lost weight. Her clothes hung loose. Her eyes were ringed with dark circles. Laura walked up slowly. Didn't say anything, just held out the thermos of coffee she'd brought. Doris took it. Her hands shook slightly. Gene couldn't face it, Doris said, staring at the equipment lined up for sale. He left at dawn, said he couldn't watch strangers buy his dream. It's not his fault, Laura said gently. Isn't it? Doris's voice was bitter. He's the one who wanted the new tractor, the new combine, the new house. I wanted to wait, to save up. But he said everyone was doing it, that we'd fall behind if we didn't modernize. She turned to look at Laura. You didn't do it, Doris said. You and Floyd, you stayed with old equipment. Everyone laughed at you. I laughed at you. God, Laura, I laughed at you. Doris, no, let me say this. Doris's voice cracked. You were smarter than all of us. You knew. Somehow you knew that this was coming, that the debt would kill us, and you made different choices. Laura wanted to say that she hadn't known, that she'd just been scared of debt. That fear, not wisdom, had guided her decisions. But Doris wasn't finished. My kids are 13, 11, and 8, Doris continued. They're moving to an apartment in Waterloo, sharing bedrooms, no more farm, no more space to run, no more animals, because their father borrowed money he couldn't pay back. The auctioneer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting in 10 minutes. Doris flinched at the sound. I can't watch, she whispered. Laura made a decision. She went back to her truck, opened the glove compartment, pulled out an envelope she'd prepared the night before, walked back to Doris. This is for you, Ishwang, Laura said, pressing the envelope into Doris's hands. Doris opened it, stared at the contents. $5,000 in cash, $100 bills counted out and secured with a rubber band. Laura, I can't. First month's rent, Laura interrupted firmly. Security deposit, whatever you need to get the kids settled. You can pay me back when things get better. Things aren't going to get better, Doris said, but she was crying now. Real tears. They will, Laura said. Maybe not soon, but they will. Jean's got a job. You're a survivor. The kids will adapt. You'll get through this. Doris looked at her friend, at the woman everyone had mocked for being cheap, old-fashioned, behind the times. The woman who was standing here now with $5,000 cash, while Doris's world was being auctioned off piece by piece. Why, Doris asked. Why help me after I laughed at you? Laura put her arms around her friend. Because you're hurting, she said simply, and I don't kick people when they were down. They stood there together while the auction began. Laura stayed for 30 minutes, long enough to watch the first tractor sell for $18,000, half what Jean had paid for it. Then she walked back to her truck and drove home. The years between 1983 and 1985 were brutal. Foreclosures continued. In Bremer County alone, 40 farms went under, 40 families. Generations of history erased by debt. The Hartwell dealership struggled. Sales had collapsed. In 1990, Warren closed the Cedar Falls location. In 1986, he sold the entire business to a corporation from Des Moines. He stayed on as a sales manager, an employee, not an owner. Laura saw Vivian one more time during those years. At the grocery store in June of 1986, Laura was in the checkout lane when she noticed Vivian ahead of her. Vivian's groceries were modest. Hamburger, pasta, canned vegetables. The cashier rang it up. $47.38. Vivian pulled out a credit card. The cashier swiped it. I'm sorry, ma'am. This card's been declined. Vivian's face went white. She tried a second card. Same result. Do you have cash? The cashier asked. Vivian opened her wallet. 3 $1 bills. Some change. Not enough. Vivian looked up, saw Laura standing there. The shame in her eyes was absolute. She turned and ran. Left her groceries. Left the store. Laura stepped forward. I'll take care of this, she said to the cashier. She paid for Vivian's groceries, $47.38. Took them to her truck. Found Vivian in the parking lot crying in a Honda Accord that had replaced the Mercedes. Laura knocked gently on the window. Vivian rolled it down. I paid for your groceries, Laura said. They're in my truck. I'll transfer them to yours. I don't want your charity, Vivian said weakly. It's not charity, Laura said quietly. It's what neighbors do. She loaded the groceries without waiting for permission. When she was done, she walked back to Vivian's window. Are you okay? Laura asked gently. Vivian laughed, a broken sound. Warren lost the dealership. We lost the house. Everything's gone. She looked at Laura. You were right, all those years. I laughed at you in front of everyone, and you were right. Laura reached through the window, put her hand on Vivian's shoulder. This isn't your fault. The system failed you. But you didn't believe the system, Vivian said. I was scared, Laura admitted. That's all. Vivian looked at her for a long moment. Thank you for the groceries, for not gloating. Laura squeezed her shoulder once, then stepped back. The years rolled forward. The crisis eased. By 1990, land prices had stabilized. Banks were lending again, cautiously. That spring, Clifford Stevens stopped by the Brennan farm. He was 65, ready to retire. His kids had moved to the city. I've got 160 acres to sell, Clifford said. Borders your place. Wondered if you'd be interested. How much? Laura asked. $1,400 an acre, $224,000 total. Laura did the math immediately. They had $253,000 in savings. They could buy it outright, but that would drain their reserves. Give us a week, Laura said. That evening, she and Floyd sat at the kitchen table. The ledger open. We can afford it, Floyd said. Pay cash. Or, Laura said slowly, we borrow. Floyd looked at her sharply. You want to take on debt? 55,000, Laura said. Put down 185,000 cash. Keep 50,000 in reserve. Finance 55 for 5 years. Floyd was quiet. This would be their first time borrowing money for land. Why? He asked. Because I want a cushion, Laura said. If something goes wrong, taking a small loan lets us keep that cushion. What would the payment be? At 9% over 5 years, about $1,140 a month. We can handle that easily. Floyd nodded slowly. You comfortable with this? Laura took a breath. No, I hate owing money, but this is smart. Small enough to pay off fast, large enough to keep us liquid. Then let's do it, Floyd said. They met with the banker. Tom Werner looked over their financials and smiled. Mrs. Brennan, you two have perfect credit. Laura presented the plan, not Floyd. Laura. She laid out the numbers, the down payment, the loan amount, the payment schedule. The loan was approved that afternoon. Laura signed the papers. They bought Clifford Stevens's 160 acres. They now owned 480 acres total. And then Laura did something that surprised even Floyd. She paid that loan off in 4 years instead of 5. Extra payments every month, attacking the debt with focused intensity. In March of 1994, Laura made the final payment, $1,140.12. That evening, she built a fire in the fireplace, pulled out the mortgage papers, and burned them. Floyd watched from his chair. Feel better, he asked. Yes, Laura said, watching the papers curl and blacken. Much better. They owned 480 acres, free and clear. No debt. The farm was safe. The spring of 1995 came with news that surprised no one who knew the Brennan family, but caused plenty of talk in town. Clayton Brennan was coming home. He'd been gone for 10 years. College at Iowa State, engineering degree. Good job with John Deere in Waterloo designing hydraulic systems for combines. Salary of $80,000 a year. Benefits, retirement plan. The kind of career parents dreamed their children would have, and he was giving it up to be a farmer. Laura was 61 that spring, still strong, still capable, but she and Floyd had been talking more about the future, about what happened to the farm when they were gone, about legacy. Clay arrived on a Saturday in April with everything he owned packed into a Ford Ranger. He was 28 years old, had his mother's careful nature and his father's quiet determination. He pulled into the yard and found Laura in the shop working on the 1952 Farmall that she'd rebuilt 14 years earlier. Need a hand? Clay asked from the doorway. Laura looked up, smiled, set down her wrench. Always, she said. That evening, the three of them sat at the kitchen table, the same pine table that had been there since 1947. Floyd poured coffee. Laura opened the farm ledger. Before you commit to this, Laura said, looking at her son, you need to understand what you're walking into. She turned the ledger around so Clay could see. Column after column of numbers. Income and expenses tracked meticulously for 40 years. We own 480 acres free and clear, Laura continued. Equipment is old but functional. We have $293,000 in savings. We make about $120,000 a year in a good year, $70,000 in a bad year. Clay studied the numbers. That's more than I expected. Because we don't owe anything, Floyd said simply. Every dollar we make, we keep. No debt service eating it up. People at work said I was crazy to leave, Clay admitted. Said farming was dying, that I'd regret giving up a career. Laura and Floyd exchanged a look, a slight smile. Sound familiar? Laura asked. Clay laughed. Yeah, I guess it does. Here's what you need to know, Laura said, leaning forward. This farm doesn't make you rich, it makes you stable. It gives you freedom. No one tells you when to work or how to work. You answer to the land and the weather and yourself. That's worth more than $80,000 a year to some people. To me, Clay said quietly. Floyd nodded, then welcome home. The learning curve was steep. Clay knew the theory of farming from growing up on the place. But running it was different, making the decisions, managing the money, understanding when to plant and when to wait. Laura taught him the books. Every evening she'd sit with him at that kitchen table and go through the accounts, showing him how to track expenses, how to project income, how to build in cushion for bad years. The mistake most farmers make, Laura explained one evening in June, is they farm to their best year. They have one good year and assume every year will be that good. So they buy equipment based on best case income. Then they have an average year and can't make the payments. So you farm to your worst year, Clay asked. I farm to my I'm every year minus 20%, Laura said. If I can make it work at that level, then good years are profit. Bad years are manageable. Clay wrote it down. The wisdom of careful mathematics. Floyd taught him the land, how to read soil, how to know when it was ready for planting, how to manage drainage, how to rotate crops to maintain fertility. But it was in the shop that Clay learned the most important lesson. One evening in July, the 1948 Farmall threw a rod, just stopped running in the middle of cultivating. Clay was frustrated. They needed that tractor. Harvest was coming. He found Laura in the shop already pulling the engine. We should just buy a newer tractor, Clay said. This one's almost 50 years old. Laura looked at her son over the engine block. How much would a newer tractor cost, she asked. I don't know, 10,000, 15. And how much will parts cost to rebuild this engine? Clay thought about it. Maybe 600? And how long will this engine last once I rebuild it? Another 20 years, probably. Laura nodded. So for $600 and 40 hours of my time, I get 20 more years of service. Or for $15,000, I get a tractor that's still old, just less old than this one. She turned back to the engine. Mathematics, Clay. It's always mathematics. Clay picked up a wrench. Teach me. They rebuilt that engine together over the next week. Laura showing Clay every step, how to measure tolerances, how to hone cylinders, how to set valve clearances. Knowledge that couldn't be learned from books, only from doing it with patient hands guiding you. When they started that engine and it ran smooth and strong, Clay felt something he'd never felt at his engineering job. Pride in creating something lasting with his own hands. Now you're a farmer, Laura said simply. The community noticed Clay's return. At church, at the grain elevator, at the feed store. People commented, some positive, some skeptical. Heard your boy's back, one farmer said to Floyd at the elevator in August, giving up that fancy engineering job. He is, Floyd confirmed. Hope he knows what he's getting into. Floyd just smiled. He's learning from the best. By fall harvest of 1909, Clay had settled into the rhythm. Up before dawn, working until dark. The kind of hours that would have horrified his colleagues at John Deere. But there was a satisfaction in it that desk work had never provided. One evening in October, after a long day of combining soybeans, Clay sat on the porch with his parents. The Iowa sunset painted the sky orange and purple. I met someone, Clay said suddenly, at church, Sarah Mitchell. She teaches third grade in town. Laura and Floyd exchanged a glance, the kind that parents who'd been married 40 years could communicate volumes with. Sarah Mitchell, Laura said thoughtfully. Ed and Martha's daughter. Yeah. Nice girl, Floyd said. Sensible. Clay laughed. High praise from you, Dad. Sensible matters more than pretty, Floyd replied, though from what I recall, Sarah's both. They sat in comfortable silence. She knows I'm a farmer now, Laura asked. Not an engineer, Chum. She knows, Clay said. Doesn't seem to care about the money difference. Then she's sensible indeed, Laura said with a small smile. Clay and Sarah were married in the spring of 1997 at Grace Lutheran, the same church where Vivian Hartwell had laughed at Laura 16 years earlier. Now it was full of celebration. At the reception held in the church basement, Laura watched her son dance with his new wife and felt the weight of continuity. The farm would go on. The lessons would continue. Sarah fit into farm life easier than Clay had expected. She kept teaching, but helped with the books in the evenings, learned to drive the truck during harvest. She understood that farming was a partnership. In '99, their daughter was born. They named her Lorraine after Laura, called her Lori to avoid confusion. Laura held her granddaughter in the hospital and felt something shift in her chest. This tiny person would inherit everything they'd built. She's beautiful, Laura whispered. Takes after her grandmother, Sarah said, with a tired smile. God help her then, Laura replied. But she was smiling too. The new millennium came and went. Life on the farm continued its ancient rhythms. Planting, growing, harvest, winter. Again and again. In 2001, Clay attended an agricultural conference in Des Moines. During a break on the second day, he stood in line at a coffee station. Behind him, two older farmers were talking. He didn't know them. They didn't know him. Remember that woman up in Bremer County, one of them said. The one who bought those two beat-up Farmalls back in '81. Clay froze, kept facing forward. Brennan, the other man said. Laura Brennan, hell of a story. Whatever happened to her? Still farming far as I know. Her son runs the operation now, but she's still involved. They own 480 acres, free and clear. And the dealer who laughed at her Hartwell lost his business in '86, died about 2 years ago. Heart attack. There was a pause. You know what the lesson is? The first man said. What's that? Sometimes the crazy ones are the only sane ones in the room. Everyone thought Brennan was a fool. Turns out she was the smartest person in the county. The storm separated the careful from the careless, the second man agreed. Clay got his coffee, walked away without revealing who he was, but he was smiling. That evening he called his mother from the hotel. Mom, he said, you're a legend. Don't be ridiculous, Laura replied, but he could hear the pleasure in her voice. No, really. 2 old farmers at the conference were talking about you, about how you were right and everyone else was wrong. Laura was quiet for a moment. I wasn't right, Clay, she said finally. I was just scared, terrified of debt. That fear made me careful, but it wasn't wisdom. It was fear that happened to point in the right direction. You've got to stop downplaying it, Clay said. You made good decisions for 40 years. That's discipline. Well, Laura said, tell your father that story when you get home. He'll enjoy it. The years between 2001 and 2015 were good ones for the Brennan farm. Clay proved himself capable, learning from his parents but adding his own innovations. GPS guidance systems, soil testing, precision agriculture, but he never borrowed to buy equipment, never took on debt for expansion. Stayed true to the lessons his mother had drilled into him. Little Lori grew up in the farmhouse, ran through the same fields her grandmother had worked, learned to drive a tractor at 12, started helping with harvest at 14. Laura watched her granddaughter grow and saw herself. The same careful nature, the same tendency to think before acting. Grandma Shalori asked one summer evening when she was 15, why don't we have new tractors like the Johnsons? They were sitting on the porch, the same porch where Laura had sat with Floyd so many times. Because new tractors come with payments, Laura said, and payments mean you work for the bank instead of yourself. But everyone else has them. Everyone else has debt, Laura corrected gently. We have freedom. I'll take freedom over flash any day. Lori absorbed this. Kids at school think we're poor. Laura smiled. Your grandfather and I have over $400,000 in savings. Your parents own 480 acres debt-free. We're not poor, honey. We're careful. There's a difference. But we look poor. Looking poor and being poor are two very different things, Laura said. Some of the flashiest people you'll meet are drowning in debt. Some of the quietest people you'll meet are millionaires. Never judge a book by its cover. Lori nodded slowly, beginning to understand. Floyd died on a Tuesday morning in March of 2015. He was 81 years old. That morning, he didn't wake up. The doctor said it was his heart. Quick, painless. Laura sat beside his body in their bedroom and held his hand and felt the weight of 60 years of partnership settling on her shoulders. They'd been married in 1955, had built a life together, raised a son, saved a farm, survived a crisis that destroyed thousands, done it all together. Now he was gone. The funeral was at Grace Lutheran. The church was full. Clay gave the eulogy. My father, Clay said, was not a flashy man. He didn't drive new trucks or wear expensive clothes. He just worked, quietly, carefully. For 60 years, he farmed the same land his grandfather had bought in 1923. Clay's voice was steady. He and my mother survived the farm crisis of the 80s by making one simple decision. They refused to borrow money they couldn't afford to pay back. While others leveraged and expanded, Dad and Mom stayed small, stayed careful, stayed debt-free. He paused. People laughed at them. Dad never argued, just kept doing what he knew was right. And when the storm came, he was still standing. Clay looked down at his notes, then decided to speak from the heart. Dad taught me that the best investment is the one you don't make. That old paid-for beats new with payments. That freedom is worth more than appearance. Those lessons kept this farm in our family for 92 years. They'll keep it for 92 more. The 3 years after Floyd's death were hard for Laura. Not financially. The farm was fine, but the loneliness was profound. She filled her time, came to the farm 3 days a week, worked in the shop, taught Lori how to rebuild engines, passed on knowledge. In 2017, Laura was 83, still sharp, still capable, though slower. She walked with a slight limp from a hip that was wearing out. One Sunday in October, she was leaving church when someone called her name. Laura, could I speak with you? Laura turned. Vivian Hartwell stood there. She was 81 now, looked every day of it. Gray hair cut short, simple dress, hands that shook slightly. They hadn't spoken in years, not since the grocery store in 1986, 31 years ago. Vivian, Laura said evenly. Of course, Vivian. They walked to a bench outside the church, sat down in the October sunshine. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Vivian said, Warren died in 1999. I heard, Laura said gently. I'm sorry. Don't be. He died bitter, angry at the world, never got over losing the dealership. It killed him, not his heart, his pride. Laura didn't respond, just listened. I've wanted to talk to you for 30 years, Vivian continued. Never had the courage. But I'm 81 now, I might not get another chance. She turned to look at Laura directly. I was wrong, Vivian said simply. About everything. About you, about money, about what matters. I laughed at you in that parking lot in 1981, made you feel small in front of everyone. Vivian, no, let me finish. Vivian's voice cracked. You were right. About the debt, about the old equipment, about living below your means, and I made your life harder because I was too proud to see it. Tears were running down Vivian's weathered cheeks now. When my credit card got declined in 1986 and you paid for my groceries, I went home and cried for 3 hours. Not because I was grateful, because I was humiliated. The woman I'd mocked had shown me more kindness than I'd shown anyone. Laura reached over, took Vivian's hand, held it. We were all just doing our best, Laura said quietly. You did what everyone told you was right. That's not a character flaw. That's being human. But you didn't believe them. I was scared, Laura admitted, terrified of debt. My mother-in-law grew up during the Depression. She drilled into me that debt was slavery. But that wasn't wisdom, Vivian. That was fear. Vivian shook her head slowly. Fear that saved you. Pride that destroyed me. I lost everything. Warren lost his self-respect. While you kept the farm, raised your son, passed everything on. Laura was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something she'd been thinking for 30 years. I didn't win, Vivian. I just didn't lose. There's a difference. Your pain gave me no joy. It still doesn't. She squeezed Vivian's hand. I forgave you years ago, Laura continued, for the parking lot, for the mockery, for all of it. You don't need to carry that anymore. Vivian broke down completely, sobbed in a way that spoke of decades of guilt finally being released. Laura sat with her, held her hand, two old women on a church bench, survivors of different storms. When Vivian finally composed herself, she looked at Laura with red eyes. Thank you, she whispered. They sat together a while longer, then Vivian stood carefully. I won't take up more of your time, she said. Vivian, Laura said, would you like to come to dinner, Sunday dinners? You're welcome anytime. Vivian's eyes filled with tears again. Yes, I'd like that very much. Next Sunday then, Laura said, 4 o'clock. Vivian nodded, walked away, stopped after a few steps, turned back. Laura, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever regret it, living so carefully, never splurging, never taking that trip to Europe? Laura thought about it, really thought. No, she said finally. I don't, because I had something you didn't have. Peace. I slept well every night, never woke up worried about making a payment. That peace was worth more than all the trips in the world. Vivian nodded slowly, understanding finally. That's what I thought, she said. That's what I hoped you'd say. She walked to her car and drove away. Laura sat on the bench alone, feeling lighter somehow. Vivian came to Sunday dinner the next week, and the week after. She became part of the extended family, a reminder of forgiveness. Laura died on a Tuesday morning in March of 2018, 3 years to the day after Floyd, the same month, the same day of the week. Clay found her in the shop. She'd gone out after breakfast saying she wanted to adjust valves on the 1952 Farmall. When she didn't come in for lunch, he went looking. She was sitting in the old chair by the workbench, tools arranged neatly around her. The Farmall sitting nearby still running after 66 years. She'd simply stopped. She was 84 years old. The funeral was at Grace Lutheran. Standing room only, 300 people. Clay stood at the pulpit, looked out at the faces, saw Vivian Hartwell in the third row crying quietly. Saw old farmers who remembered the crisis. Saw young farmers who'd heard the stories. My mother, Clay began, was called cheap, backward, and foolish for 20 years. In 1981, she made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She bought two old tractors for $600 instead of financing a new one for $32,000. His voice was strong. Warren Hartwell laughed at her. His wife Vivian mocked her at church. The community thought she was behind the times. Clay paused. 15 years later, the Hartwells had lost their dealership. My mother had bought our neighbor's land. 37 years later, I'm standing here at my mother's funeral. The Brennan family still owns the farm that my great-great-grandfather bought in 1923, 480 acres, debt-free. He set aside his notes. Mom's lesson wasn't about tractors or money, he continued. It was about freedom. She understood something that took me years to learn. Debt steals your choices. Every payment you owe is a choice you don't have. His voice grew stronger. Mom chose freedom over flash, peace over prestige, security over status, and she never apologized for it, even when people laughed. Clay's eyes swept the church. She taught me that the courage to be different is the most valuable inheritance a parent can give a child. That discipline beats luck every time. He paused. My mother never gloated. When Vivian Hartwell's credit card was declined, Mom paid for her groceries anonymously. When her best friend lost her farm, Mom gave her $5,000. When the community finally realized she'd been right, Mom didn't say, "I told you so." She just kept living her truth. Clay's voice broke slightly. She was the best person I've ever known. Not because she was perfect, but because she was consistent. For 60 years, she never wavered. He looked at his daughter in the front pew. Lori, your great-grandmother left you more than land. She left you a blueprint for how to live. Own what you have. Fix what you can. Don't owe anyone anything. That's freedom. After the burial, after everyone had gone home, Clay took Lori to the farm shop. The 1952 Farmall sat there. 66 years old. Still running. Your great-grandmother rebuilt this engine in 1982, Clay said. She was 48. She tore it down completely. Did it all herself. He walked over to the wall, pointed at a framed photograph. This was taken in 1981, right after she bought those two Farmalls. The photo showed young Laura standing beside the old Ford F-150, holding the build of Senior on her hands, a slight smile on her face. Below the photo in Laura's handwriting, they laughed at the old truck. They mocked the used tractors. But these carried us through the storm while theirs drowned in debt. LB 1996. Lori read it twice. Great-grandma was really different, wasn't she? She was, Clay confirmed, in the best possible way. Kids at school think I'm weird because we don't have new equipment. Clay knelt to his daughter's level, looked her in the eyes. Your great-grandmother was called weird for 60 years. Called cheap, called a fool. She died owning 480 acres debt-free with over $500,000 in the bank. The people who called her names, most of them lost everything. Who was really the fool? Lori absorbed this. So it's okay to be different. It's better than okay, Clay said. Sometimes being different is the only way to survive. He stood, walked to the Farmall. Come here, I'm going to teach you something your great-grandmother taught me. Lori joined him. Clay opened the toolbox, pulled out a wrench, handed it to his daughter. This is how you adjust valves, he said. Your great-grandmother could do it in her sleep. Now you're going to learn. Lori took the wrench hesitantly. Why couldn't we just take it to a mechanic? We could, Clay said, and pay $100 an hour, or we can learn. Save the money. That's how this family has survived for 100 years. Self-reliance. He guided her hands, showed her the technique, how to check clearance, how to loosen the lock nut, how to turn the adjustment screw. In this family, Clay said as they worked, we fix our own equipment, we maintain what we have, we take care of things, make them last. Lori adjusted the first valve, checked the clearance with a feeler gauge. Got it perfect. Good, Clay said. That's exactly right. Your great-grandmother would be proud. They worked together in the quiet shop. A 16-year-old girl learning skills that would serve her for a lifetime. A father passing on wisdom that stretched back 4 generations. Outside, the Iowa sun was setting. The same sun that had risen and set on this farm for 95 years. When they finished, Clay started the Farmall. The engine turned over smoothly. Ran strong and clean, 66 years old and still working. Your great-grandmother bought this tractor when everyone said she was crazy, Clay said over the rumble. Paid $600 cash. Fixed it herself. Ran it for 37 years. That's value. That's the Brennan way. He shut off the engine. The shop fell quiet. I want you to remember something, Lori, Clay said seriously. This farm has survived the Depression, The farm crisis, recessions, droughts, floods. You know why? Why? Because every generation has made the same choice your great-grandmother made. To own what we have, to fix what we can, to never owe more than we can pay back immediately. That discipline is our legacy. Lori nodded, beginning to understand. Will I farm this someday? She asked. Clay looked at his daughter, saw Laura in her face. That's up to you, he said. But if you do, you'll do it the right way. The Brennan way? Debt-free, self-reliant, beholden to no one but yourself and the land. They walked out of the shop together, father and daughter, the next generation learning from the last. Behind them, the 1952 Farmall sat silent, waiting for the next season, the next generation, the next 66 years. And somewhere, if the dead could smile, Laura Brennan was smiling, because she'd done what she set out to do. She'd kept the farm. She'd passed on the wisdom. She'd proven that careful beats flashy every single time. The old Ford F-150 from 1967 still sat in the barn, 51 years old, still running when needed. The two Farmalls, the 1948 and the 1952, both still operational, 70 and 66 years old, still earning their keep. The ledger books going back to 1955 showing every penny earned and spent, a record of discipline that spans 6 decades. The 480 acres passed from grandfather to father to son to granddaughter. Still in the family, still productive, still debt-free. That was Laura Brennan's legacy. Not the money in the bank, though there was plenty of that. Not the land, though it was valuable. The legacy was the lesson. The understanding that freedom comes not from having more, but from owing less. That peace of mind beats prestige every time. That the courage to be mocked, to be called old-fashioned, to swim against the current, that courage is what separates those who survive from those who drown. Laura Brennan had been called a fool for buying 2 old tractors in 1981. She died 37 years later with $500,000 in the bank and a farm that would feed her great-great-grandchildren. The people who laughed, most of them lost everything. In the end, the mathematics were clear. Laura had been right all along.